She inherited a farm from an aunt she barely knew. Everyone in town looked at her with pity and laughed behind her back. But when she found a mysterious safe in the old cellar, her life changed forever. And what was inside shook not just her, but the entire state. Emily Carter stood on the porch of the old farmhouse, holding rusty keys in her trembling hands. 28 years of life in Chicago hadn't prepared her for this moment. She worked in an office, wore business suits, and drank Starbucks coffee. Now she was staring at 100 acres of land in rural Indiana that she'd inherited from Aunt Martha. "Poor thing," the neighbors whispered. "What you gonna do with that old wreck?" Aunt Martha had died 3 months ago. Emily hadn't seen her since childhood, but the lawyer called and said, "You've inherited everything. The farm, the house, even the debts." The debts were substantial. Emily's savings were nearly gone, and she'd quit her job to come here. It was either make this work or lose everything. "You're making a mistake," her mother had said over the phone. "Sell it and come home." But something deep inside Emily refused to give up. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was desperation. Or maybe it was the way Aunt Martha used to tell her stories about the farm when Emily was little. The drive from Chicago had taken 4 hours through increasingly empty countryside. The last 20 miles were all dirt roads and endless cornfields. Emily's GPS had lost signal twice, leaving her to navigate by memory and hope. When she finally pulled into the driveway, her heart sank. The photos the lawyer had shown her must have been taken decades ago. The white farmhouse was now gray with neglect, its shutters hanging crooked like broken wings. Weeds grew through the porch steps, and a family of raccoons had made their home in what used to be the mailbox. The townspeople of Millbrook weren't exactly welcoming. At the local diner, conversation stopped where she walked in. The cashier at the hardware store gave her suspicious looks. And when she asked about contractors to fix the roof, people suddenly became very busy. "City folk don't last long out here," said old Pete at the gas station, his weathered hands counting out her change with deliberate slowness. "This land has a way of chasing people away." There was something in his voice that made Emily's skin crawl. A warning, a threat, or maybe just the truth. The farmhouse was in worse condition than she'd imagined. Broken windows, sagging floorboards, and a roof that leaked in 4 places. But the barn was solid, built from hand-hewn timber that had withstood a century of Indiana storms. The land stretched out like a green ocean under the endless sky, rich black soil that her great-grandfather had farmed before the Great Depression. Emily's first night in the house was a nightmare. Every sound made her jump. Creaking floorboards, scratching in the walls, the whistle of wind through broken window frames. She'd brought a sleeping bag from Chicago, but the floors were so warped she couldn't find a level spot to lay it down. Around midnight, she heard a car engine outside. She looked out the grimy window and saw headlights moving slowly down her driveway. The car stopped at the edge of the yard, idling for several minutes. Emily's heart pounded as she watched the dark silhouette behind the windshield. Then, just as suddenly as it had arrived, the car backed up and disappeared into the darkness. Emily spent her first week cleaning and making basic repairs. Every day, she noticed someone watching her from the road. Different cars would slow down, their occupants staring at the house. When she waved, they quickly drove away. She tried to make conversation with her nearest neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Peterson who lived half a mile down the road. But when Emily introduced herself as Martha Henderson's niece, Mrs. Peterson's face went white as sheet. "You're staying in that house?" the old woman asked, backing toward her own front door. "Yes, I inherited it. Did you know my aunt well?" "I knew her well enough to mind my own business," Mrs. Peterson said sharply. "And if you're smart, you'll do the same." The door slammed shut with finality that made Emily's stomach clench. What did Aunt Martha do to make everyone so nervous, she wondered. The answer would come sooner than she expected, hidden in a place where shadows had kept secrets for decades. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what city you're watching from. On her 8th day at the farm, Emily decided to explore the cellar. She'd been putting it off because the wooden steps looked ready to collapse. But the house needed a new water heater, and she had to check the old one. The cellar door groaned like a wounded animal when she pulled it open. The wooden steps descended into complete darkness, each one sagging under her weight. Emily's flashlight beam danced across stone walls that seemed to absorb the light. The basement was larger than she'd expected, with multiple chambers carved out of the bedrock. Most were filled with the usual farm cellar contents: canning jars covered in decades of dust, broken furniture, and the skeleton of what had once been a coal furnace. But in the back corner, behind a curtain of cobwebs that looked like mourning veils, she found something that stopped her cold. A massive black safe sat against the stone wall like a sleeping giant. It was old but substantial, probably weighing several hundred pounds. The metal was scratched and dented, as if someone had tried to break into it many times. But what caught Emily's attention were the scratches around the dial. They formed letters. Help US. Someone had carved into the metal with what looked like a knife or a screwdriver. Emily's heart started racing. Why would Aunt Martha keep a safe in the cellar? And why hadn't the lawyer mentioned it? More importantly, who had carved that desperate message? She tried the handle. Locked, of course. There was a combination dial and what looked like a key slot. The safe was old enough that it might take both a key and a combination to open it. Emily searched through Aunt Martha's papers upstairs, looking for any clue about the safe. She found old tax records, faded photographs, and letters from the County Agricultural Extension Office, but nothing that looked like a safe combination or mentioned where a key might be hidden. As she sorted through a shoebox of old photos, she found something interesting. A picture of Aunt Martha and Uncle Robert from what looked like the 1980s. They were standing in front of the barn, but Robert wasn't smiling. His face looked haggard, frightened. And in the background, barely visible, was a black sedan with two men in suits standing beside it. Someone had written on the back of the photo in shaky handwriting, the day they came to make their offer. The next morning, Emily drove to town to ask about locksmiths. But first, she stopped at the small library to do some research. If Aunt Martha had been hiding something, maybe there were clues in old newspaper archives. The librarian, a kind woman named Betty Morrison, helped her access the digital archives. They searched for articles from the late 1980s and early 1990s, looking for anything about the Henderson farm. What they found made Emily's blood run cold. Local farmer dies in tragic accident. Read a headline from September 15th, 1991. The article described how Robert Henderson had lost control of his car on Highway 37, crashing into a tree. He was survived by his wife Martha and had no children. But buried in the article was a detail that caught Emily's attention. Henderson had recently been involved in a land dispute with local developers. Mrs. Morrison, Emily said carefully, "Did you know my aunt and uncle?" Betty's face grew sad. "I knew them well. Robert was a good man. He farmed the land his grandfather had homesteaded. But toward the end, what happened toward the end? People came around wanting to buy farms. Made good offers, but when folks said no, bad things started happening. Equipment would break down. Livestock would get sick. And if you kept refusing, Betty trailed off, but Emily could guess the rest. Did anyone ever prove anything? How could they? The sheriff was in someone's pocket, and the state police said it was all coincidence. But farmers aren't stupid, Miss Carter. We know when we're being squeezed out. Emily's next stop was the hardware store. She tried to approach Mr. Brennan casually. "I found an old safe in my aunt's cellar," she said. "Do you know any locksmiths who might be able to help me open it?" Mr. Brennan went pale. His hand shook as he reached for his inventory book. I wouldn't know anything about that. You might want to leave it alone." "Leave it alone? It's my property now. Some things are better left buried, young lady. Your aunt knew that better than anyone." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" But Mr. Brennan had already turned away, pretending to be busy with paperwork. The conversation was over. Her final stop was the diner. Maybe Sarah, the waitress who'd seemed friendly, would be more helpful. "Oh, honey," Sarah said, refilling Emily's coffee cup with hands that trembled slightly. "You don't want to mess with that thing. You know about it?" Sarah glanced around nervously. The diner was nearly empty, but she still lowered her voice to barely above a whisper. "Everyone knows about it. Been sitting in that cellar for 20 years. Maybe longer. What's in it? Nobody knows. And nobody wants to find out." Sarah leaned closer, and Emily could smell cigarettes and fear on her breath. Your aunt used to say it contained things that were better left alone. Things that could hurt people. That doesn't make sense. If it was dangerous, why not get rid of it? Sarah straightened up quickly when the bell over the door chimed. A man in an expensive suit walked in, tall, silver-haired, with cold blue eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. "Afternoon, Sarah," the man said pleasantly. "Coffee, please." "Of course, Mr. Blackwood." Emily felt the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. This was Harold Blackwood, the man whose initials she'd seen in Aunt Martha's old papers. The developer who'd been buying up farmland. Blackwood's eyes found Emily, and his smile never wavered. But there was something predatory about it, like a shark that had just caught the scent of blood. "You must be Martha's niece," he said, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Harold Blackwood. Welcome to Millbrook." Emily shook his hand reluctantly. His grip was firm, but his skin felt cold as marble. "I hear you're fixing up the old place," Blackwood continued. "That's wonderful. The Henderson farm is a special piece of property. If you ever decide to sell, I'd be very interested in making an offer." "I'm not selling." Blackwood's smile never faltered, but something shifted behind his eyes. "Of course not. You just got here. But if you change your mind, and people often do, please give me a call." He placed a business card on the counter next to Emily's coffee cup. Then he paid for his coffee and left without drinking it. "That man gives me the creeps," Sarah muttered once he was gone. "He's been circling your property like a vulture ever since Martha died. What does he want with it? Same thing he wanted 20 years ago. The land. But your aunt never would sell. Not after what happened to Robert." "What exactly happened to Robert?" Sarah looked around again, making sure they were alone. "Officially? Car accident. But Robert had been working on his car that very morning. Said it was running better than it had in years. Then 6 hours later, his brakes just happened to fail on the steepest hill in the county." Emily felt sick. "You think he was murdered?" "I think Robert Henderson was asking too many questions about where all the farmers were going. And I think certain people didn't like the answers he was finding." As Emily left the diner, she noticed the black sedan again. It was parked across the street, engine idling. When she looked directly at it, the car pulled away slowly. Someone was definitely watching her. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the safe, about the fear in people's voices, about Harold Blackwood's cold smile. Around midnight, she heard a car engine outside again. She looked out the window and saw headlights moving slowly down her driveway. The car stopped for a moment, then backed away and disappeared into the darkness. Whatever was in that safe, someone else wanted it badly, and they were getting impatient. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Emily was having coffee on the porch when a rusty pickup truck pulled into her driveway. An elderly man climbed out, moving slowly but deliberately. He looked around nervously before approaching the house. "You must be Martha's niece," he said, tipping his baseball cap with hands that bore the calluses of decades of farm work. "I'm Jim Crawford. I knew your aunt." Finally, someone willing to talk. Emily invited him up to the porch, grateful for any conversation that didn't involve fear and whispered warnings. "I heard you've been asking about the safe," Jim said without preamble, settling into the old rocking chair that had been Uncle Robert's favorite. "You know about it too?" Jim nodded grimly, his weathered face creased with worry lines that seemed to have deepened overnight. "I helped your aunt move it down there. Oh, it must be 22 years ago now. She made me promise never to talk about it. But she's gone now, and you deserve to know the truth." Emily's pulse quickened. "What truth?" "Your aunt was a brave woman. Maybe too brave for her own good. That safe contains evidence of something that happened here a long time ago. Something that powerful people wanted buried forever." "What kind of evidence?" Jim looked around nervously, scanning the tree line as if expecting to see watchers among the branches. "Documents. Letters. Proof that some folks in this town did terrible things to good people. Your aunt was going to expose it all, but then what? Her husband died. Car accident, they said." Jim's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But Martha knew better. She knew they'd come for her next if she didn't stay quiet. So she locked everything away and kept her mouth shut. Emily felt her blood turn cold. "Are you saying Uncle Robert was murdered?" "I'm not saying anything that can be proven in court. But your aunt believed it until the day she died. And now you're here, asking questions, and they're getting nervous again. As if summoned by his words, the black sedan appeared at the end of the driveway. It sat there for a long moment, engine idling, windows tinted so dark they looked like empty eye sockets. "See what I mean?" Jim said, his voice tight with fear. "You need to be very careful, Emily. These people have killed before to protect their secrets." "Then why don't you go to the police?" "To the FBI." Jim laughed bitterly. "Police? Half of them are on the payroll. And the FBI?" He shook his head. "Your aunt tried that once. Federal agent came down from Indianapolis, took her statement, promised to investigate. 2 weeks later, they found his car in White River. Said he'd had a heart attack and crashed. But Martha knew better. The sedan finally drove away, but its message was clear. They were watching. They were waiting. Jim stayed for another hour, telling Emily stories about her aunt and uncle that painted a picture of two people living in constant fear. Martha had become a recluse after Robert's death, rarely venturing into town except for necessities. She'd installed multiple locks on every door and had taken to sleeping with a loaded shotgun beside her bed. She lived like a prisoner in her own home, Jim said sadly, all because she refused to let them win. That afternoon, Emily called a locksmith in the next town over, 40 miles away. She couldn't trust anyone local. The locksmith, a middle-aged man named Tony Ricci, agreed to come out the next day. "It's an old safe," Emily told him over the phone. "Probably from the 1960s or 70s. I don't have the combination." "No problem. I've opened plenty of old safes. Just make sure you have documentation proving ownership. I don't want any trouble with the law." Emily assured him she had the proper paperwork, though she wondered what kind of trouble Tony was expecting. That evening, as she prepared a simple dinner of canned soup and crackers, Emily's phone rang. Unknown number. "Miss Carter." The voice was smooth, cultured, with just a hint of menace underneath the politeness. "Who is this?" "A friend. Someone who wants to help you avoid making a terrible mistake." Emily's hand tightened on the phone. "What kind of mistake?" "The kind that destroyed your aunt's life. The kind that killed your uncle. You're playing with forces you don't understand, Miss Carter. Walk away now, while you still can." "I don't know what you're talking about." A low chuckle came through the phone. "Oh, I think you do. You've been asking questions about things that should remain buried. Hiring locksmiths to open containers that should stay closed. This path leads nowhere good. Are you threatening me?" "I'm offering you a choice. A very generous offer, actually. Sell the farm to Mr. Blackwood for twice its assessed value and return to Chicago. Forget you ever heard of Millbrook. Forget about safes and secrets and ancient history. And if I refuse, then you'll learn why your aunt spent 20 years looking over her shoulder. Why your uncle's car mysteriously lost its brakes on a perfectly straight road. Why federal agents sometimes have fatal heart attacks at very convenient times." The line went dead. Emily's hands were shaking as she set down the phone. She walked to the kitchen window and peered out into the gathering darkness. Was that movement near the barn? A shadow that didn't belong? She grabbed the flashlight and stepped onto the back porch. The beams swept across the yard, illuminating nothing but empty space and her own paranoid imagination. But as she turned to go back inside, Emily heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps on gravel. Slow, deliberate steps that circled the house like a predator stalking its prey. She locked every door and window, checking each one twice. Then she dragged her mattress into the living room and positioned herself where she could see both the front and back doors. The footsteps continued for another hour, always just at the edge of hearing. Sometimes they seemed to pause directly outside a window, as if someone was testing the locks or peering inside. Emily didn't sleep at all that night. She sat in the darkness with her phone in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other, jumping at every sound the old house made. Around 4 a.m., she heard car doors slamming outside. Multiple vehicles had arrived, their engines rumbling quietly in the pre-dawn darkness. Emily crept to the front window and peered through the curtains. 3 SUVs were parked in her driveway, their occupants invisible behind tinted glass. They sat there for 20 minutes, engines idling, before finally driving away. The message was clear. We know where you are. We know you're alone, and we can get to you anytime we want. But Emily had inherited more than just the farm from Aunt Martha. She'd inherited her stubborn streak, too. And the more people tried to frighten her, the more determined she became to uncover the truth. Tomorrow, Tony the locksmith would arrive. Tomorrow, she'd finally learn what was worth killing for. She just had to survive until then. Tony arrived at exactly 10 a.m., driving a van filled with professional locksmith tools. He was a compact man with calloused hands and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You sure you want to open this thing?" he asked, examining the safe in the cellar. "Sometimes it's better to let sleeping dogs lie." "Everyone keeps telling me that," Emily said. "But it's my safe now, and I have a right to know what's inside." Tony nodded and got to work. The safe was old, but well-made. It took him nearly 2 hours of careful manipulation before the tumblers clicked into place. "There we go," he said, stepping back. "You want me to stay while you open it?" Emily shook her head. "I think I need to do this alone." After Tony left, Emily stood in the cellar, staring at the safe door. Her aunt's words echoed in her mind. Some things are better left alone. But it was too late for that now. She pulled the heavy door open. Inside were 3 shelves packed with manila folders, bound documents, and what looked like hundreds of letters. Emily pulled out the first folder and opened it. Her blood ran cold. It was a contract dated 1989, a land purchase agreement for the Morrison farm, signed by James Morrison for $50,000. But attached to it was another document, a letter from Morrison to someone named HB. "They're forcing me out," Morrison had written. "Said if I don't sell, my family will have accidents, just like what happened to the Hendersons. I can't risk it, but I want you to know the truth. This isn't a willing sale. They're stealing our land." Emily's hands shook as she reached for another folder. This one contained similar contracts, all from the late 1980s and early 1990s. The Peterson farm, the Williams place, the old Johnson ranch, all sold for far below market value, and all signed under threat. The letters told the real story. Farmers terrified for their families. Mysterious accidents befalling those who refused to sell. And behind it all, the same initials, HB. Emily found a newspaper clipping from 1991. Local businessman Harold Blackwood announces major development project. The accompanying photo showed a middle-aged man in an expensive suit shaking hands with the mayor. Harold Blackwood, HB. Emily rifled through more documents. Bank records showing mysterious cash deposits. Correspondence between Blackwood and city officials. And most damning of all, a handwritten confession from someone named Eddie Walsh. "I can't live with this anymore," Walsh had written. "Harold paid me to sabotage Robert Henderson's car. Made it look like an accident. But it was murder, plain and simple. Robert was going to expose everything, so Harold had him killed. I'm done being his hired killer." Emily's heart pounded. Eddie Walsh had confessed to murdering Robert Henderson, Aunt Martha's husband. Her uncle. She grabbed another folder and found more confessions. Details about other accidents. Plans to intimidate farmers. A complete blueprint of a conspiracy that had stolen millions of dollars in land. Suddenly, Emily heard car doors slamming outside. Multiple vehicles. She stuffed the most important documents into a canvas bag and crept upstairs to peer out the window. 3 black SUVs surrounded the house. Men in dark suits were getting out, moving with military precision. Emily's phone rang. Unknown number. "Miss Carter," a smooth voice said when she answered. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." "Who is this?" "Harold Blackwood. And I think it's time we had a talk." "I'm coming in," Blackwood said. "Don't do anything foolish." Emily's mind raced. She was outnumbered and outgunned. But she had one advantage. They needed the documents intact. "If you come in here, I'll burn everything," she shouted through the window. A pause. Then Blackwood's voice, closer now. "Miss Carter, you don't understand what you're dealing with. Those documents could destroy innocent people." "Innocent?" Emily laughed bitterly. "You murder my uncle. Robert Henderson chose to interfere with legitimate business. He forced our hand." Emily heard footsteps on the porch. She grabbed the bag of documents and ran toward the back door, but it was too late. Men in suits were already there. She was trapped. The front door opened slowly. Harold Blackwood stepped inside. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Emily's car. He was followed by 4 men who looked more like soldiers than businessmen. "Miss Carter," Blackwood said politely, "you've caused us considerable inconvenience." "Good," Emily said, clutching the document bag. Blackwood smiled coldly. "Your aunt was stubborn too. It didn't end well for her. You killed Aunt Martha? Cancer killed your aunt. But her final days were uncomfortable. She knew we were watching. Knew we could get to her any time we wanted." Emily felt sick. "You're monsters. We're businessmen. This town was dying when we arrived. We brought jobs, investment, prosperity. A few old farmers had to be relocated, yes. But the greater good was served. By stealing their land? By murdering anyone who objected?" Blackwood's expression hardened. "Give me the documents, Miss Carter. All of them. And you can walk away from this. Go back to Chicago. Forget this ever happened. And if I refuse, then you'll suffer the same fate as everyone else who crossed us." Emily's hand tightened on the bag. Inside were the confessions, the contracts, the proof of decades of corruption and murder. She thought of the farmers who'd been terrorized into selling their family land. Of Uncle Robert, killed for trying to do the right thing. Of Aunt Martha, living in fear for 20 years. "No," she said firmly. Blackwood sighed. "I was hoping you'd be reasonable." He nodded to one of his men. The man stepped forward, pulling out what looked like a taser. Emily backed away, but there was nowhere to go. Suddenly, the front window exploded inward. Glass showered the room as a figure dove through. Jim Crawford, clutching a shotgun. "Get away from her," the old man shouted. Chaos erupted. Blackwood's men reached for their weapons, but Jim was faster. The shotgun boomed, and one of the suits went down screaming. "Run, Emily!" Jim yelled. "Get to the truck." Emily didn't hesitate. She sprinted past the confusion of shouting men and diving bodies. Jim's pickup truck sat in the driveway, keys dangling from the ignition. Behind her, she heard more gunshots. Jim Crawford, the old man who'd helped Aunt Martha hide the truth, was buying her time with his life. Emily threw the document bag into the truck and gunned the engine. The pickup roared to life just as Blackwood's men poured out of the house. Bullets shattered the rear window as Emily floored the accelerator. The old truck fishtailed down the dirt driveway, kicking up clouds of dust. In the rearview mirror, she saw Jim Crawford collapse on the porch. The brave old man who'd kept Aunt Martha's secret for 20 years was gone. But his sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. Emily had the evidence, and she knew exactly where to take it. The FBI field office in Indianapolis was 2 hours away. Harold Blackwood had ruled this town through fear and murder for decades. But his reign of terror was about to end. Emily drove like her life depended on it, because it did. The black SUVs appeared in her rearview mirror within minutes, gaining fast on the country roads. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911. "This is Emily Carter," she said when the dispatcher answered. "I'm being chased by armed men who just killed Jim Crawford at the old Henderson farm. I have evidence of multiple murders," and the phone went dead. Either the signal had failed or someone had cut it. The SUVs were getting closer. Emily could see muzzle flashes in her mirrors as they opened fire. The truck's rear window shattered completely, and bullets pinged off the tailgate. She took a hard ride on Highway 37, tires screaming. The old pickup wasn't built for high-speed chases, but it was tough, just like Aunt Martha had been. 20 miles out of Millbrook, Emily spotted a state police cruiser parked at a rest stop. She swerved into the parking lot, laying on the horn. Trooper Williams got out of his car, hand moving to his weapon when he saw the bullet-riddled pickup truck. "Help me," Emily shouted, jumping out with the document bag. "They killed Jim Crawford. They're trying to kill me too." The black SUVs roared into the parking lot, but when they saw the state trooper, they kept driving. For now, Trooper Williams listened to Emily's story with growing amazement. When she showed him some of the documents, the confessions, the threatening letters, the evidence of Robert Henderson's murder, his face went pale. "Ma'am, if this is real, it's real. My aunt hid these documents for 20 years, and now they've killed Jim Crawford to get them back." Williams radioed for backup and FBI assistance. Within an hour, the rest stop was crawling with federal agents. Special Agent Sarah Chun took Emily's statement while forensics experts examined the documents. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of Harold Blackwood's criminal empire. "This is incredible," Agent Chun said, poring over Eddie Walsh's confession. "We suspected Blackwood for years, but could never prove anything. These documents are a smoking gun. What happens now? Now we arrest everyone involved. And thanks to you, we can finally give the victims justice." The FBI moved fast. By sunset, Harold Blackwood was in custody, along with 6 associates. The raids extended beyond Millbrook. Corrupt officials in 3 counties were arrested, and frozen bank accounts revealed millions in stolen assets. The local news crews arrived by evening, followed by national media. The story of a young woman who'd inherited a farm and uncovered a decades-old conspiracy captivated the country. Emily found herself reluctantly famous, giving interviews about Aunt Martha's courage and Jim Crawford's sacrifice. "They died protecting the truth," she told the reporters. They knew that someday someone would find those documents and bring justice to the people who'd been hurt. The trials began 6 months later. Eddie Walsh, now in his 70s, took the stand to confess his crimes in detail. Other witnesses came forward: farmers who'd been terrorized, officials who'd been bribed, family members who'd suspected the truth but been too afraid to speak. Harold Blackwood was convicted of conspiracy, murder, racketeering, and fraud. He received life in prison without parole. The stolen farmland was returned to the victims' families. The town of Millbrook received federal aid to recover from decades of corruption. And Emily Carter became a hero to rural communities across America. 2 years later, Emily stood in the same spot where she'd first seen Aunt Martha's farm. But everything had changed. The old farmhouse now gleamed with fresh paint and new windows. The field stretched green and healthy to the horizon, worked by farmers who'd finally gotten their family land back. And where the old cellar safe had hidden its secrets, Emily had built something new, a small memorial to Robert Henderson, Martha Henderson, and Jim Crawford. "The truth tellers," the plaque read, "who preserved justice when justice seemed lost." The town of Millbrook had transformed too. New businesses lined Main Street. The diner where Sarah had once spoken in whispers now hosted community meetings. And in the town square, a new statue honored the farmers who'd lost their land to corruption. Emily had kept the farm, turning it into a working homestead and a center for investigative journalism. She'd written a book about her experience, with all proceeds going to a foundation that helped small farmers fight corporate intimidation. "Miss Carter," a young voice interrupted her thoughts. Emily turned to see a teenage girl with a notebook and determined expression. "I'm Jenny Walsh," the girl said. "Eddie Walsh was my grandfather. I wanted to thank you." Emily felt her throat tighten. Eddie Walsh had died in prison the previous winter, but not before writing letters to his family, finally telling them the truth about his decades of guilt and shame. "He spent his last years trying to make amends," Jenny continued. "Because of you, he got that chance. Our family's been carrying shame for so long, not knowing why. Now we understand, and we can heal." Emily hugged the girl, thinking about the ripple effects of truth. Aunt Martha and Jim Crawford's courage had saved more than just some documents. It had freed an entire community from decades of fear and lies. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Another case, another small town where people suspected corruption but were too afraid to speak up. Emily's reputation had spread, and victims across the country were reaching out for help. She looked back at the memorial one last time. Uncle Robert's death had started this chain of events. Aunt Martha's courage had preserved the evidence. Jim Crawford's sacrifice had given Emily the chance to escape. And now, their legacy lived on in every corrupt official exposed, every victim who found justice, every community freed from fear. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with truth. And sometimes the most unlikely heroes are ordinary people who refuse to let injustice win. Emily climbed into her truck. Not the bullet-riddled pickup from that terrible day, but a new one painted farm green with Truth Seekers Foundation on the doors. She had another mystery to solve, another town to help, Another safe full of secrets waiting to be opened. The work was dangerous. The powerful people she investigated had long memories and short tempers. But Emily had learned something important in that old cellar. The truth might be buried, but it never dies. It just waits for someone brave enough to dig it up. As she drove toward her next case, Emily smiled, thinking of Aunt Martha. The old woman had been right about one thing. Some things were indeed better left alone. But justice was not one of them. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like if Emily's story inspired you. Share your thoughts in the comments below.